considered televised. So the True Amateur Tournament in Las Vegas, they do live streaming online. So you know, there's a lot of stuff now that's not televised through ESPN, but televised through online. Like one of Josh's national titles was an Extra Frame live stream event. There was an event there of two events that I made live stream telecast, but that's about it. That about tops my television achievements, I guess. Any other questions?
How long have you been bowling and where did you get your start at, Craig?
I started when I was 6, I'm 28, so 22 years. I played a lot of different sports. I was really active in, especially basketball, and mainly really did that up until I was about 16. I was much better at that than I was at bowling, but I stopped growing, stopped putting on weight midway through high school, and quickly found out that if you're not a certain size, shape, speed in basketball, you have to work a lot harder to be just as good as someone else. And it was about that time I was getting into bowling more, and found out in bowling you don't have to be a certain size, strength, anything like that to be good. Really, if you work harder, there's talent in everything, but if you work harder, it can really pay off in bowling. You don't have to be a certain height or size or anything like that. So I would say really the start for me was when basketball didn't really play out, and I started committing myself more to bowling. I've always been a competitor, so as soon as I didn't play basketball as much, I started bowling a lot more, and slowly had more and more success from 16 on.
What tournaments did you focus on when you were at a young age?
Well, a lot of JBT. JBT was a little different for me back then because they didn't have Smart Fun where you could bowl adult and junior. So I had to declare being adult early, which in hindsight I don't know if I wish I would have done that. But a lot of JBT when I was young, and then I went adult early, and in town there was a lot of Strike Force, ACBA, those kinds of things. But the tournament landscape has changed a little bit since then.
And this was just a couple years ago, right?
Well, a decade now. It feels like a long time to me. Maybe to the parents, a decade is not that long, but it feels like a long time to me.
You just look very young, Craig.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? So, do we all remember Josh's last presentation? Lane play on boardwalk. What did we learn there? Raise your hand. Tell me some nuggets that you guys really liked that you really enjoyed from that one. Okay, like lane surfaces. Okay.
31-foot rule.
31-foot rule. That's a very, very good one. Very good. What else?
Ball surface.
Okay. Okay. So what grid? Josh told me that he went around and hit a lot of people's balls with that along that. By show of hands, how many people were surprised that on a shorter pattern you would use a duller ball? A lot of people. That's normally a big surprise. Big surprise. So that's good. Some of the things that they were mentioning, did anybody forget that? Now remember that? Need to go over that before we go with that? Because a lot of what he touched on the first one, we're using on in this one as well. So does everybody remember the rule of 31, the surfaces, the lane surfaces? All right. We're ready to begin? So I guess we're talking about winding road today. And the first thing we are going to discuss is, oh, maybe it's the word. There we go. So this is axis rotation. Bowling ball swing potential is based on how you roll it. 0 degrees of rotation is equal to no hook, 45 degrees of rotation is equal to medium hook, and 90 degrees of rotation is equal to most hook. One thing I want to touch on here, especially for the parents that might bowl lead, a lot of times rotation or axis rotation gets confused with axis tilt. You'll hear people say, how he tilts it this way or that way. They are two different things. Rotation is much easier to change. And I talked to Mr. Blanchard, and he agreed that this would be a great video to show. Let me change this slide. Here's just an image representation of rotation. So 0 degrees of axis rotation is much more end over end. 45 degrees of rotation is kind of a little bit of side rotation. And then 90 degrees of rotation is full rotation. The question is do you think one's better than another? Anybody think that there's one rotation that, or anything in between, anything from 0 to 90 that you think is going to be better all the time than another?
45?
45, you think? I would say that there's more times that 45 is better than the other one, but there's none of them that are good all the time. But most importantly, it's knowing that what yours, you have to kind of adapt to what yours is. So on tour, you'll have a lot of guys that have a lower rotation, and then you'll also have guys even like Pete Weber, who's known to have a lot of rotation. He's much closer to 90 degrees. And even though they're players with a lot of different rotations, they all have success. But what makes them good is that they know what their ball roll is, and they can kind of adapt to that. They know how to use it, which is mainly what this presentation is about here. So I'm going to show you guys a video that might help you understand the rotation differences there a little bit better. What this video is it's going to be, before I play it, so you know what you're looking at here, it is with a throw bot. Anybody know what a throw bot is? Ever heard of one? What's a throw bot?
It's like a machine that like throws the ball and gets the exact same every time.
Correct, yes. So they can set every single possible thing. So this throw bot is going to throw the ball in the same exact path every time, same exact speed, same exact rev rate. The only thing that's going to be changing is that rotation in the other slide. You're going to see as the rotation increases, the ball is going to look more. As the rotation decreases, the ball is going to look less, okay? That's 60 degrees, and the ball makes it back to the pocket. So, any question with that? Anybody need to see it again?
I had a question. In what scenario would a 0 degree curve be best?
Spares.
Good question. So, typically when you're like on the shorter patterns, you're rarely ever going to want 0. You're going to want less axis rotation when the lane is creating a lot more back end for you, then you're going to want less rotation. Less rotation is less back end. It kind of helps complement the lane pattern that's giving you a lot of back end. And vice versa. If you don't have a lot of back end, a lot of times you'll want a little more axis rotation. You'll rarely ever want either extreme. You're never going to really want 0 degrees or 90 degrees. 45 is going to be the kind you use most often. But the most important thing to remember is that if you have less rotation, you're going to be a little straighter for the most part, right? Because your ball is not going to create as much momentum. As your rotation goes up, you just have to be a little further left. You're going to have to belly that lane a little bit more. Does that make sense? Is there any questions with that? Anybody else want to see that rotation video again? Make sense? Yep.
I have a question. By the way it's shown up there, you normally don't hold your hand on top of the ball. Your hand is under the ball. So it's actually you're going to be rotated the same way, but under the ball, right? Not going to be sitting on top of it.
Oh, correct. Yes, yes. So, just to clarify too, this line is kind of showing an oil track. And, yeah, absolutely. The main way that axis rotation is changing for the coaches is mainly once the thumb is out of the ball. A lot of the time when people try to learn to change their axis rotation, they're trying to do it back here in the backswing. And then you get early, you lose leverage, you kind of get around the ball a little bit. So what Bob's saying, I believe, is absolutely correct. Everything's going to really be the same. But once that thumb is starting to exit the ball, that's when either the fingers, come a little bit more behind of it, behind it, creating less axis rotation, or they come around more on the side in the way that we see Pete Weber, have that beautiful rotate around the side of the ball, kind of release, and then it's going to create more axis rotation. The real difficulty is making sure you don't try to do that early when you focus on the ball. Does that answer your question, Bob?
Looking at it that way, it's sort of deceiving. That's not what you're going to do to get the axis rotation. You're going to pull them up, but you're going to be turning
Right.
in the same direction.
Yeah, and I would say that I wouldn't take this so much as that you need to learn to change your axis rotation. That's really almost a difference between really good amateurs and professionals. It's not something to be able to do easily, consistently. Mainly what this is about is understanding your natural rotation, and understanding how that plays a role in the way to play the lane properly. A lot of the times when you read on oil patterns, people think they all have to play the same exact part of the lane. But since they all have different rotation, that's just not possible for the most part. So as you have more rotation, you're going to have to, as the previous slide said, you're going to have to, 90 degrees rotation is most hook, 0 is no hook. So it's more about knowing your own ball. So if you're able to see that you have more rotation, you're going to create more hook than maybe somebody else that has less rotation. If you create more hook, you'll have to be a little further left, create a little more left. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any other questions? Bob?
The other thing that you need to understand, coming out of the ball, you don't come across, you don't come out straight, but your fingers are creating the rotation for you.
Yes.
You're trying to help it across.
Yes. And I can't emphasize this enough, guys. The thing to take from this is understanding the way you naturally throw it. Making sure that you can play the lanes to fit your A game. It's not about going out there and wanting to be able to create 0 and create 90. It's much easier to create a lot of bad habits when you get out there and you're trying to do that. So when you get out there, you want to try and throw your normal shot the best you can. Take a look at your ball roll. Try to get a guess. Are you closer to 0, closer to 45, closer to 90? And that's all we're trying to do. Does that make sense? All right. Any other questions regarding the video or this slide here? Also, for the parents too and coaches, notice that the oil ring here is in the same spot, all 3 balls. So just because you change your rotation doesn't really change where the oil rings are at on your ball. Okay? So the question is when do you use each kind of release if you're trying to use different releases? Dial in your release depending on how much hook on the back end of the lane. The more angle in the back end you use closer to your 90-degree release. What release do you think you should use on a winding road pattern? So basically what this is saying is the more angle that you need on the back of the lane, the more that closer to a 90-degree release is going to help. So on a 39-foot pattern, you're going to have a real medium amount of, so you're going to have some back end there in the pattern. It's only 39 feet. So the question is, from 0 and 45 and 90, which one do you think you would use on a 39-foot pattern like the one? 45? By show of hands, how many people think 45? You will all be correct. So on the shorter patterns, which was a question that one of you already kind of beat this slide to, on the shorter patterns, you're going to be closer down to that 15 degrees. As you get on the longer patterns, it can vary a little bit on the really long ones. But for the most part, as you get further left of the head pin, you have to figure out a way to create that entry angle back to the pins to get that 10 out. And if we remember the rule of 31, the shorter the pattern, the further right you're going to be. Well, if you're further right, you're kind of already creating that angle, right? Because you're right at the head pin. Once you get to Badger and Scorpion and you get further left, and your ball's going away from the head pin and then, pretty far down the lane, it's still going away from the pins. It has to find a way to quickly create that angle back into the pin. And so to be able to do that, a lot of the times you're going to need a 90-degree or closer to a 90-degree release. Does that make sense? Any questions? Josh?
Does the angle of the release, does that change maybe the pin carry? So like with 45 degrees, maybe better for carrying 10 or 90 is better?
That's a great question. So it's It's gonna depend. So the best way to think about it is by show of hands, anybody kind of have an idea of when they feel what kind of pins they're leaving, when they feel like their ball is going in almost too steep into the pocket. Would you guys say that a lot of times you maybe leave for the right-handers, you leave 9 pins, 4 pins, you get that, that ringing 10 pin that makes you want to rip your hair out, and you're like, how do I get rid of this thing? Those are all the kind of leaves that you're going to leave when you have too much angle. And the leaves you're going to leave if you have not enough angle are mainly the flat 10, or that 6 pin lace in the gutter, because the ball's kind of deflecting, it doesn't have that angle to grab with the pins. To answer your question, it's really going to depend on what you're leaving, not necessarily the pattern, but a lot of the other variables. But if you find that you think you're throwing a great shot, and you're leaving, you strike, and then you 9 pin, and you strike, and then you leave a 4 pin, chances are you have too much angle down lane. And some people can adjust that with the release and the rotation. You can also change that with ball and other things kind of like that. Does that answer your question? Any other questions regarding the angle that you're trying to create down lane and how that works with your release?
Yeah, I think when you're bowling, you always want to strive for consistency.
Yes.
So, I mean, what you're saying is we need to change our release point to create a different angle on the ball.
Absolutely, yes.
So I think it would be very difficult to be consistent every throw, right? If it's new to you, you just have to practice it, huh?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And to clarify there too, you're not going to be. I would say the best players in the world. Kegel, from what I've heard, I've participated in this before, but Kegel has something when they're training players at their research facility where they try to have them do their least amount of rotation, release, and their maximum. And some of the best players in the world only have a 30 to 40 degree variance, which is actually a lot. But the point is that the best players in the world have that kind of variance, and they bowl a lot. So, again, the goal isn't to go out there and immediately try to change your release time. It's just having the information. So if you do and you want to come practice, you want to come and practice on the release, you either have more or less rotation. You can do that, practice it, exactly like Joe's saying, not in competition. Get it where you can get it down consistently. And then, most importantly, this will allow you to know when to use it and when to change it. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Don't run, in competition, those kinds of things. I would say anytime your score matters to you, you need to be focusing on your score. And if you're going to go practice and the score doesn't matter as much, that's a great time to develop that muscle memory and try and take maybe a different release with a different rotation and try and ingrain that as muscle memory. Good? All right, any other questions? And we are mainly focusing on winding road too, so I don't want to get too distracted with the other ones, with the other patterns. All right, do you remember the 3 questions from last session? I kind of touched on this earlier. How long is the pattern? How much volume? What surface is it on? So real quick, we all remember what Josh went over there. So how long is the pattern? We got that from the graph, right? Anything from 32 feet, 52 feet these days, which is way more variety than it ever has been. How much volume? He gave you guys ranges from low to medium to high. You guys remember those ranges? Really? Well, I'll pop quiz you on the next slide. And then what surface is it on? What lane surface? You guys remember the 3 lane surfaces? See if as a group. You only have 3. See if we can get all 3.
Anvil, Pro Anvil, and SLB.
Yes, SPL, but close. He did all the work for everybody. Nice job, Leslie. And knowing that is certainly crucial. I'm sure Josh went over that before, so we'll move to the next slide. Any questions or refreshments on this stuff up here? All right, so here's your graph for the winding road. Let you guys take a look at that. All right, so what's our length? 39. A little louder. 39 feet. What's our volume total? 22.20. Perfect. Now the question is 22 low, medium, or high based on the last presentation? Medium, very good. It's at the very bottom of the medium range, so it's really low to medium. The medium range is like 22 mils, and up a little bit. So it is medium, but it's low to medium, especially for 39 feet. So what do we think that means? So even though 39 feet is definitely a medium length for the most part, it is still low to medium volume for the length. So let's just brainstorm as a team. We're going to go bowl a tournament as a team. What are we brainstorming? What do we think that means?
I think it means it'll break down fast.
Okay.
It's on the lower side of the medium, so.
Okay, very good, yeah. What else?
Break point could be around 8.
Yep, perfect. How did he get that?
31.
31, beautiful, yep. Yeah, I would say those are two great points. Anything else anybody want to add that they would maybe pull from this graph?
Tell a little bit about the reverse oil.
That's a little outside the scope of this presentation. And truthfully, even some of your best players in the world don't pay attention to that. If you really want to know afterwards, I can certainly tell you how that works. But not a lot of information you're going to pull from that.
Question on the 40 micrometers, is that per board? How is that arrived at?
Good question. So the way that it works, without getting too technical, is it's really the rate that the pump pumps the oil. And so the only two settings you'll ever see is 40 UL and 50 UL. A lot of the newer patterns are 50 UL, which just means that they pump the oil at a faster rate. All the machines, even if you have a 50 UL pattern, and say you have a machine that is at 40 UL, it can still put down the same pattern. It just puts out 20% less oil because of the 40 UL versus 50 UL, so it's just less volume. But for the most part, it won't. It's not too bad. Anything else in this graph, guys? The main things that I would look at, and for the most part, Josh and I would look at the same exact thing. Exactly what I believe Mike said. It is a low volume for the lane, so it means two things. One, that the lane is probably going to transition a little quicker. It also means that it might hook a little more than what I'm expecting for a 39-foot pattern. Okay? All that makes sense? Any questions with that? Okay, so now we have ratios. We have sport, 1-to-1 is 3-to-1, challenge 3-to-1 to 5-to-1, and house 5-to-1 to 100-to-1. Feels like 100-to-1 sometimes. Those little pictures to the right are kind of representations of what that looks like. So this is kind of adding to what you guys already know about graphs. These sections down here you'll see at the bottom of the graph. And this is really the biggest thing that high-level players will look at, and it's a lot of information. And what this is really telling you is how flat or curved, like this one is here, that pattern is. What this ratio means, is anybody familiar with these ratios at all? Or want to take a stab at even guessing them?
The 1-to-1 is going to be flat all the way across.
Right?
So 3-to-1, I suspect in the center is going to be 3 times as much as the outside.
Correct. Yeah, so another way of thinking of it, for those of you that maybe didn't hear Bob, is what this ratio is measuring the board on the lane that has the most amount of oil to the board on the lane with the least amount of oil. So in 1-to-1, the board with the most amount of oil has, we'll say, 1 unit of oil, and the board with the least amount of oil has 1 unit of oil. So that means the most and the least are exactly the same, perfectly flat. As you get to 3-to-1, you get a little tiny bit more of a curve. Obviously, as you get to 100 to 1, if one board has 100 times the amount of oil as another board, you get a huge difference between the amount, the wet parts of the lane and the dry parts of the lane. The ratio is going to be really useful to you, so make sure if you have any questions with this, you let me know right now.
So for the 1-to-1 ratio, is that the US Open pattern?
Yes, correct. Yep, yeah, very good. Yeah, it's U.S. Open as well as Bear. PBA Bear pattern is 1-to-1, and the U.S. Open and Bear pattern are extremely similar.
tough.
And tough. That's as hard as they get. It's 1 to 1. Any other questions with the ratio? All right, so what we're looking at here, now that we understand how these work, we know that 1 to 1 is as hard as it gets, and normally the more that ratio goes up, for a lot of league bowlers, it gets easier. Sometimes for Josh, you guys will have to tell him this next time you see him, say, Greg said, on the house conditions, it gets harder for you professionals, because sometimes those guys aren't quite used to it. What you're looking at on the graph is right here. So think of this, these are board numbers here. So this is the 8th board on the left to the 12th board on the left, and the 8th, as well as on the right. The 8th board on the left is to the right. So this is telling you your ratio. So for example, the 3 to 1 pattern, you're 1.01 to 1 in the middle, 1 to 1 there, 1.4 to 1 in that section to the far outside your 2.69 to 1. Now, keep in mind that this is a reference to the middle of the lane. So the middle of the lane still has more on the outside, but most importantly, you get your ratio. So this pattern really is what ratio? It's 2.69 to 1. Does that make sense? So where would Winding Road fit in those 3 categories? Sport, yeah. So, but what that also means is, would you say that Winding Road is one of the easier or one of the harder sport patterns based on the ratio? Easier? Technically, it'd be a little easier. Always depends on the player, but it is. If you're basing it only on the ratios, 3 to 1 is going to give you a tiny bit more mistake room on fresh conditions than 1 to 1, and this is very, very close to 3 to 1. Very close to 3 to 1. All right. Any questions with the ratios here and reading the graph? All right, 31, this is a refresh of the 31 hole. We got 43, 40, 36 for the pattern. You guys probably remember this one from the first presentation?
Yeah.
So, and again, this is kind of a sign that we have a pretty advanced group. There's a lot of these slides you guys are beating to the punch. You mentioned this earlier, that you're going to be around the 8 board. Now, what do you think so far in this presentation is going to tell you? You know you're going to be at the 8 board at the end of the pattern at 39 feet, but what do you think that the rotation part of this presentation tells you about how you're going to attack the pattern? It's kind of a tough question. Raise your hand. We got nothing to lose, just stuff to learn. So, for example, if... Oh, I'm sorry.
It'd be closer to like 45, right?
45 is the ideal. So the question is that, for example, if you normally want it to be, so we're all going to be at the 8 board, right, at the end of the pattern. Are we all on the same page there? Okay. So if you have more rotation, does that mean that you would want to be a little further left or a little straighter? If you have more rotation? Further left. Okay, perfect. And if we had less rotation, we would be further right. Further right. Is there any questions to that? Just want to make sure we're connecting the dots on the rotation and playing the pattern and those kinds of things. Bob?
When you're talking about the drag, you're talking the start point.
Yes.
Your feet and your lay down board to give you the angle to that.
Correct. Yes. So just to clarify exactly what Bob's saying, all things being equal, so you have same rev rates, etc. If you have more rotation, you're going to need a little bit more angle to compensate for that extra rotation. With your feet, angle in the front part of the lane, with where you stand and giving the ball a little bit more belly to the right, if you have more rotation. All right, guys. Any other questions on this slide before we move on? So, questions, which again we kind of beat to the punch. Where should our break point be? What arrow will we most likely play? What surface do we want to use? Which hour is that? Let's start off with the first one. In unison, What should our breakpoint be? 8. Around 8 more, yes. What arrow will we most likely play? This one's going to be a little more open. Show of hands. Okay, a little closer to the second arrow. The real answer is it may depend on our rotation, right?
That would take your speed too.
Yes, speed, rev rate, absolutely, all those things. But for the most part, most of us are going to be pretty close to around the second arrow. The more that rev rate and rotation goes up, you will need to be closer into in between second and third arrow. And now, what surface do we want to use? What are our thoughts there? What surface do we want to use? Dull, shiny? Dull, okay. Anybody feel shiny?
Maybe when it breaks down, you might want to do it.
Good, good. So by show of hands, how many people feel dull? That's what you're going to want to use. For the most part, that's right. That is 100% correct. Exactly as he said, maybe as it breaks down, you may use shiny. Mainly because, as Mike said, it's low volume, so that oil might deplete in the lane, and you might need something shiny to create a little more length. So Avalon pads are going to be, 2,000, 1,000 surface, that kind of thing. Any other questions of these? And that is it. Any other questions?